Welcome back again. This is Gregory Allen McCowan, GREGORYALANMCKOWN, Houston, Texas. State ID 28632893. That's for the Article 5 petition for We the People. Now, this is October 6th, 2025. Just past noon, 12:04, and a few 1 seconds, 59. So that's my birthday, 12/4/59, October 6th, but that's not my birthday, 2025. My birthday, of course, is on December 4th, 1959. Now, there's a story I wrote about several times in association with, as you've seen in one of the videos, that Nostradamus told me the exact time of, on the evening of March 31st, after sunsets. That's April 1st in the Hebrew calendar. And in the Hebrew calendar, at sunset was the next day. So that at 8:59 or 8:58 p.m., when I bought the Nostradamus books, it was still March 31st. So Nostradamus in Century 3, Quatrain 3, listed the unexpected event that will occur, that in the very first year that John Hogue issued his complete prophecies of Nostradamus, and it couldn't be repeated ever again with anybody else. And certainly, after everybody read the prophecy from when he issued the book, that when I went in unknowing, unaware of the prophecy, I actually walked in to the fulfillment of the prophecy, to purchase John Hogue's Nostradamus complete prophecies, April, after sunset, the 31st, which would be April in the Hebrew calendar, and before midnight, March 31st in the secular calendar, the unexpected event of receiving the book of Nostradamus prophecies. In that regard, there's another story, in which I wrote in my many book and letters and repeated at least twice. And it's a twist of mind. And I'm not going to go back to the volume of Nostradamus to pull out the prophecy of the missing 10 days, where the change from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar occurred. And in that very important piece of information that Nostradamus mentioning those missing 10 days is the fact that we have like a cycle around the sun of 365 days and a quarter. So we have what we call a leap year. Every 4 years, that those 4 quarters of a day, 6 hours or so, add up to another day. So we have a February 29th, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024. The next leap year day, of course, would be 2028. sequentially, we were getting our daily dates corrected after the change from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. But we're still on the time reference from this 10 missing days, which Nostradamus mentions in his prophecy. And he actually declares the very day and the moment in time that it was changed as April 10th. In other words, somebody went through March 31st, and suddenly the next day it was April 10th. And there's a year that this was performed, but it was illustrated in between the death of Nostradamus and my birth. So that in conjunction with this 10 missing days, now Nostradamus was born like December 14th, 1503. And he died supposedly July 2nd, 1666. I got the book here, so I could refer back to it if I'm misspoken. But there's a prophecy in Ezekiel telling him that he would lie on his side for 390 years, or 390 days, and then he'd roll over for another 40 for Israel. One's for this reason and another for that. So, in this day per year prophecy, 390 years later would be July 2nd, 1956. 1,250 days after that, which goes back to the scriptures of Revelation chapter 11 of the 1,260 days, is December 4th, 1959, when I was born. But if you go 1,260 days, it's December 14th, 1959. So this is where the correction of the 10 missing days comes in, so that Nostradamus didn't actually die on July 2nd, 1566. He actually died June 22nd, 1566, which you all know on June 22nd, 1941, Adolf Hitler invaded Russia. But that correction in the dating of his death goes to 390 years later, June 22nd, 1956, when he supposedly dies again. And then his rebirth would be 1,260 days later. It was December 4th, 1959. So that this is what makes the exact conjunction of the two prophecies from the book of Ezekiel, 390 years, and another event, 390 years in his future of death, that he would be reborn 1,260 days later, of which God's calling me his son. And of course, I've been surviving 45 years of attempted murder from the age of 20 to be a 65-year-old virgin to say that prophecy was exact, that God would not be denied his honor of authority, of being recognized. So the interesting point is that even though my father, this is October, he was born October 15th, 1929, and he died November 13th, or November 26th, I should say, 2013. So when the two witnesses, one would be King David and the other would be King Solomon, were in Russia, on the throne of Russia as Israel reborn Christians in Russia, the Jews would invade Russia, slaughter the entire nation of Russia and all of Christianity as a repeat of annihilating Israel in the ancient times. So there we have, I was viewing this show, and there's 300 million Russians. Not anymore. There's only 146 million Jews. The Russians don't exist. They only claim to be Russians because they're living in the land disguised as Russians. Now they make a piss-poor nation at war. And I really mean a piss-poor nation. They don't know whether to keep their workers in the factories building weapons or send them to the front to be killed. But they're just a nation that's going to go into extinction anyways. Because none of them deserve it. So they're going to fight to their death until they're all dead. So, getting over the fact and point that I had to go through the scriptures to discover this information, get the book of Nostradamus to discover his life story, and then even read in the correction of the 10 days of the Julian and Gregorian calendars, and I put together all the dates and times. And then he makes another prophecy of 80 years. So here I was, born as Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov. And it's easy for me to remember the date because it's just 4/8/12. 1904, 8 August, the 12th day. 4/8/12. That's that. That's an easy way to remember. Then I died July 16th, 17th, midnight. And this would be, considering the time of day here, noon, midnight, over on the other side of the world. So, the essence of reality is that I died like 3 weeks short of my 14th birthday. August 12th, 12 days. July 16th, July 31st, 13, 25. 15 and 12, 27 days. Just 3.5 weeks. So if you consider that in the prophecy, Nostradamus says he'll live 30 years or 80 years in this century. Then I was born December 4th, 1959, which would be 27 days short of 1960. So there's the 15 and there's the 12. 15 of July in the July time and the 12 in the August. That's 27 days, and then 27 days short of 1959. So we have a number of years of 80 that Nostradamus says I live. There's 40 plus 27, and there's 13 minus 27. So you add those, or 14 minus 27. So you add those together, that's 54 years. But where's the other 80? So you take 54 years out of 80 years, and that's 26. So if I died on June 22nd, 1956, minus 26 years, that gives me a life somewhere in time, somewhere in history, where I lived 26 years from a certain period of time in birth. And I had to find out where that happened. So supposedly, in 1930, I was born. More than likely, June 22nd, 1930. Because Nostradamus said 80 years. So there's Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov, one of my lives, as King David and King Solomon being killed by Jews. They don't give a damn about God. They murdered Russia. And of course, I was born of a German woman at that time. A German princess to the Russian king, and you can understand why Germany was upset in World War II for killing the Russian king and his German bride. They don't want to go over that aspect of World War II, of the Jewish people being nothing but a bunch of murderers. But here you got Jewish England murderers and Jewish New York City rabbi murderers, and they're all supporting Russia in World War II. Is nothing but a nation of murderers. So while my father would be born in the United States, King David, he would give me what Nostradamus says, the prophecy, a child of Germany that knows nothing. So I'm here. I'm born into the German people as saying, you get to kill the bastards for a little while before you die again. Maybe, and I'm gonna conjecture into the future. Uh, some of the events that are still potentially discoverable in Europe that by 1930 birth, I would be 13, 14 years of age in the Hitler Jugend, 1944. But in growth and maturity, of course, I would have been well developed in a physical nature, that I would have a great proudness about myself now. And I have some things to say, but one of the facts was that the Hitler Jugend went into Normandy to fight the Americans and the British, and I was taken prisoner. In surviving the battles, photographed, and then after the war, they repatriated me back to France to be prosecuted for war crimes, even though maybe I probably didn't commit any war crimes. They did it anyways. So here I am, photographed in England, photographed in France, and then France says, well, if you fight for us in Indochina, we'll save your life. So it was either go to war in Indochina for France, Vietnam, and parts around there, or die. Well, there's a story about this. So here I am pictured in France as a German soldier, and that would be my image now. And I'm sent off to Indochina, and then there's a book written about me. This soldier was so. Here I am, a strapping 25, 26-year-old. Well, it would be from the age of like 15, 16, 10 years of Indochina before I actually die. So here I am, a guerrilla warfare expert in Indochina, and the other German soldiers that joined me in the same agreement with the French to say that as long as you give a stay of execution, we'll fight for you in Indochina. They call me the Devil's Brigade. This man was dangerous. And they wrote the stories of my life fighting in Indochina as one of the greatest combatants that they had ever witnessed in their life. Then I went off and died on the day appointed. On my birthday, 1956. So 1,260 days later, I could be born in the United States to King David again. So this is the story that goes in between Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov of his almost 14 years of life and my 40 years and 27 days of life in birth in America, that there was a missing 26 years of life where the German child knows nothing. And that's the intermediate time of Nostradamus saying that I lived in those 100 years, 80 years of those lives. 3 of them. So this is a strange peculiarity that delineates me from the rest of the populations, that they have a picture of me, both in England, which they don't want to divulge, of course, but when they send me back to France, they did the same thing. And of course, they can't show it. Nostradamus. And so before the Americans died in Vietnam during the 1960s, we all know Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov died in Ekaterinburg. Gregory Allen McCowan hasn't died, but still living past the year 2000. But there's that 26-year time where I was pictured as a born German. And though I don't look like Abraham Lincoln and I don't look like Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov, but I do look like the picture of that German. And I died in Vietnam with all the rest of the Americans, but a little bit more earlier than that. So that answers another one of those obscure prophecies. How can somebody live 80 years, 3 different lives, in 1 century? That's the answer. And so, when I got the book in 1997 and I went through the prophecies and read them, and oh, it's like this is a script of my entire life. And it goes beyond, of course. Nostradamus saying events of his death and events after his death and events of his life and death after that. So that when I finally got around to receiving the book on the exact day he predicted I would receive it, I would exactly know the story of my life. Picking up, of course, from the Old Testament stories into the New Testament, into the book of Revelations, and then further explained by Nostradamus himself telling the future of his life where I'm not a Jew. Now I'm the son of God, and the son of God is not a Jew. And all the Jews just go berserk over that. So the transformation would be when I was born, Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov to Nicholas II, that he was King David and I was King Solomon, and the Jews just didn't agree with allowing the Russian people to live. It was their war against the world. We were killed. So God in his, well, you can kill them, but I'm going to resurrect them again, and they're going to be coming back against you. And so King David was born in America. I was born in Germany, the Second World War. And the Third World War after that, of the United Nations communist expansion and fight, which I died in. And then born into King David again, in which I told King David, that's who you are. He didn't like it, of course, but he noted to the court in his records, he called me King David. At least it's in the judicial records of Michigan. But the other facts were that I would have to go on in life, and God would create obvious events for my life to be recognized in fulfilling prophecies. And of course, one of those was Century 9 Quatrain True, Century 9 Quatrain 12 of Hermes and Diane by the Lake, where I made a stained glass mirror presentation, many little silver pieces. Plant City Art Fair, October 25th, 26th, 1986. And then the countdown to September 11th, 2001. It was just a period of time where on April 13th, 1989, I smashed part of the mirror collection. And then April 28th, I smashed another completion of the mirrors, because I'm not going to let them be surrendered and somebody else claim to be Christ. But 3,000 days exactly, 3,000 days exactly after June 25th, when I smashed the glass, because June 28th I was arrested. June 25th, 1993, was September 11th, 2001. Now, there's 150 days in there that when you consider that from October 25th and 26th, 1986 to March 25th, March 26th, actually, when I was being stalked outside of Plant City, Florida, a lightning bolt came down from the sky, hit the sign across the other side of the I-4, and I raced away from those who were stalking me, because they were filming me as if I was following them. And I had to chase by them to get away from acting as if they can film me following them. I was running away from them. The lightning bolt came down, struck the sign on the other side of the road that said, "The Land of Promise, Florida." But that lightning bolt coming down would be that they would set up an entrapment of kidnapping Dennis Lauer's child. And Dennis was told, "You tell Gregory Allen McCown to come in and be employed at Universal Gear." And so from March 26th, and in the intervening time, he communicated with me to come in March 30th, which would be 7 years exactly after my first seal vision was applied to me at Michigan State University, when the book return door slammed on my thumbnail when I was returning some books, March 30th, 1980, and the 3 red dots would come out. So here's 7 years exactly. And here I'm walking into Universal Gear, signing out this application because he requested me to come into work. And then immediately after that, I'm looking at this Universal Gear and saying, "Oh my gosh, this is a weapon. It's a gun, it's an engine, it's a rocket motor. This is fantastic." And then, before I could tell Dennis any of that information that I just gleaned just by looking at the Universal Gear, I got a catalog, and then Natalie shows up. Here's Dennis, there's Natalie at Universal Gear. And then a car drives up and hands April to them. And I'm like, flabbergasted. It's like, is that the reason I'm here? Just fill out an application, come into employment, and then they get handed back their child from strangers? I was supposed to come into work on April 1st, 1987. I was leaving the state. I had the catalog in hand, the future weapon in possession and knowledge, and I wasn't going to be working at Universal Gear whatsoever because somebody kidnapped their child and extorted me to come in and fill out an application because I never asked Dennis for any employment whatsoever. Dennis knows he asked me to come in, not me requesting to come in. So when I didn't show up, he understood the answer that I had nothing to do with him being held hostage to demand that I arrive, fill out an application just to save his daughter. And then after his daughter was saved, my job was done. I didn't have to come into work because I never requested it. But what I did discover, and I got the catalog from that day of that March 30th, 1987, in Universal Gear, I got a weapon. So Dennis saw my March 30th, 1980, 3 red dots of Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn, of which are written in the epistle to John by Nostradamus in his book, and right near the 200 verses, which would be primarily associated with Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. In other words, he left it till the very end of the book to say that if you're the one that's got Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars on your thumbnail, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars on your thumbnail is 3 red dots. The previous story is all your life. Or associated events thereof. And in that regard, I didn't find it. I didn't. Here's 1980, the 3 red dots, and I got some glimpses of people who already knew Nostradamus and said it had to be with royalty, an image of a son of God. And so when I showed Dennis the 3 red dots on my thumbnail, and I pointed to Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars in the sky and say, there it is. This is what people are saying is the Son of God. So here's 7 years later on March 30th, exactly 7 years later, and they were wanting to have me taken a prisoner in Florida for kidnapping Dennis's daughter and extorting Dennis to make me allowed to work at Universal Gear. And since I never requested and I seen his daughter returned, if I showed up April 1st, I would have been arrested. That had nothing to do with it. I wasn't going to work at Universal Gear, but damn well I'm going to make Universal Gear work for me later. Because I'm a mechanical design engineer, and I knew exactly what I had discovered only because of a kidnapping of a friend's daughter that I rescued by just filling out the application. Once the application rescued his daughter, I was gone. So I did what was required of me. And then after that was done, that was my work accomplished. Just filling out the application was the first and last day I worked for Universal Gear, and I never got paid for it. So if there's anybody out there saying I'm not a savior, I at least saved one life. Well, I'm saving my own too. You too can be saved. That's, that's another expression. So my relationship with Dennis didn't end at that point because he knew when I fled from even appearing to go to work that he knew I was innocent of the charges of kidnapping. That he knew when I seen his child returned, what had actually happened. That he reported that he had got the application signed from Gregory Allen McCown to be an employee, and everybody expected me to come into work. Then seeing the kidnappers return the child, and if I showed up on that April 1st, 1987, Dennis would accuse me of being the kidnapper. And he didn't have to accuse me after I didn't show up, because I had nothing to do with it. Not even then a desire to work for Universal Gear, although I discovered at the moment of my application an incredible mechanical device. Of course, I would discover later that actually I was pushing a lawnmower with Universal Gear in it on my mother and father's lawn in 27144 Haverhill, Warren, Michigan. I was pushing Universal Gear. Well, when I got back from my travel around the United States in 1998 as a shooting gallery, escaping kidnapping and murder, and then they corralled me into Motor City Sign for observation, and I knew I was under observation. I could hear the microwaves all around me off the concrete walls bouncing. So I said, okay, now I got an audience. The military's been trying to kill me. Now I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And that's when I introduced them to Universal Gear and what I would do with it as a research and design engineer, a mechanical engineer, a physicist, all under the auspices, of course, of McMurray Creations, of which I've already previously established as my own company identity. That being the failed adventure because Brooke Shields was kidnapped, and there was no Brooke Shields to support me after her kidnapping to make that business adventure successful. Of course, I had the signed contract of July 1985, and I delivered that to Kathy Ireland in 2002 to say, here's 17 years later, this has to be renewed. And so immediately after I sent it to her, she flew to New York City to file for the rights of that contract to be reestablished that I'd signed with the Detroit Tigers in 1985. And of course, another 17 years after that, 2019, she did it again. Because you have to renew the contract every 17 years for the copyright and patent rights. And so, not that I'm dragging any woman into the shame of the Lord God Almighty, President of the United States, but there's one excited lady that knows her place in history. So, not that I mention the names of brides very often, but that was appropriately one of them. In my travels in 1988, I made it all the way to Flagstaff, Arizona, created an eagle in the sun mirror for the eagle's nest. Here's handing a multi-million-dollar priceless artwork of the Son of God in Flagstaff, Arizona to the eagle's nest for $20. But it is more importantly the fact that it was a signature of my having been present there. That was the most important aspect for me. I created a couple of eagle mirrors for the Schmittler family afterwards, duplicating the Flagstaff design because they supported my life, like handing multi-millions of dollars of treasure artworks to them also. And they didn't have to buy it. But I could have gone on to California, but I was having transmission trouble. Kingsville, Arizona had this huge valley where you had to go up a hill and down into a valley and back up a hill again to cross over the mountains into California. And I said, that's not for my transmission. I had this flat plane from Arizona all the way back to Michigan to go traveling safely without undue stress on my American Concorde vehicle to fail me returning back to to Michigan, and where I became a resident at Motor City Sign afterwards. And of course, everybody in Michigan said you'll never see him again. When I left Michigan in 1988, the Jews are telling everybody you'll never see him again. So when I arrived again, it was to everybody's surprise that, well, the Jewish prediction that I was going to be killed somewhere in the United States, well, after I went through the shooting gallery, their attempted prophecy to kidnap and kill had failed. After the bullet flew by me, October 8th, 1988, in Flagstaff, Arizona, I said, well, it's time to get out of Dodge. And so I left on October 9th, and by October 10th, I was in Kansas, just past Florence, There was a C-47 of George Michael's passing over me. They had targeting me, so I cut George Michael's throat to escape kidnapping. I went on to Wichita and stopped off at a steakhouse, and there's Martina McBride. Sitting at the backside of a table, surrounded by all of her other family guests and members. She sees the Son of God walking into the restaurant. I see her and I glanced at her and said, "Oh my God, I can't sit here and act like I'm here stalking her." So I ordered my steak dinner. I got in there just before 9 o'clock hour, like 8:58 p.m., 2 minutes before they closed the door, just like the Nostradamus book. Had my meal, and I took another glance over her as I was walking out saying, "You are one eye candy of a cherry to see." And then as I walked out to my car, she told somebody else in her audience that was there to go find out who that man was. Richard Weaver, like popping out of the seat, rushing through the tables, out the door, chasing after me, says, "We want to know who you are." He's a I asked him afterwards, "Who are you?" "I'm a photographer and a writer." And I said to him, "I'm the Lord God Almighty Christ St. Peter, Gregory Allen McCowan, and I just cut George Michael's throat 3 hours before at 6:35, of course, because this is like 9:35 after I ate my meal." And so he went back in and told everybody. Well, he called himself the Lord God Almighty Christ St. Peter, and he says he cut George Michael's throat. Well, in the gossip magazines, on April 13th, when they finally came out, I read the story. George Michael's had throat surgery ending his concert tour. And they got the news inside the restaurant before the news came out that George Michael was having throat surgery. So there's Martina McBride. And I had to wonder who that woman I saw was in Wichita. And I wouldn't see her until years later in the Baywatch. And of course, that was before she was married, but after that, she got married. But, well, there's one of the brides of Christ. She's going to be real proud of that moment because Richard Weaver came back in and said that was the Lord God Almighty Christ St. Peter. And guess what? He said he cut George Michael's throat. And there could have been a lot of laughter around the table until it was reported later that George Michael's had throat surgery. course, George Michaels requested my arrest one day. You'd have to say, what's that all about? Well, Brian had a girlfriend back in Michigan, and the girlfriend, of course, was Jewish, and she invited Brian down to help her go from the Miami International Airport to her parents' home because they weren't available. So I traveled all the way from Fountain Anasazi with Brian down I-75 to Naples, went over Alligator Alley before I-75 was completed between Miami and Naples. So here's one of the last travels of Alligator Alley. And they said nothing like going 100 miles an hour. Now I just had new shocks, new struts, new tires. Damn an alligator if he wants to be on the road now, because I'd run right over him. There's very few spots for police to sit off the side of Alligator Alley and monitor traffic speed at that point. But my gosh, when trucks are going back one way 55 miles an hour and I'm going 100 miles an hour plus in the other direction, the wind concussion back and forth really shook the car. Because we were just feet away passing each other. That was January 27th. Anyways, we made it to Miami International Airport. 11:08 a.m. was the parking sticker tag. And her flight was delayed. It went from Detroit to Washington and down to Florida. So we were waiting in the flight delay area for her arrival. And I went out to the window and looking at aircraft out on the tarmac. And then went back and sat down. And Brian sat next to me and said, "There's George Michaels." George Michaels popped out of that aircraft, marched up the ramp, told the security guard, "I want that man arrested." I didn't even look up to see George Michaels. I didn't even want to lay eyes on him, hearing what he had to say. Only Brian confirmed his identity. And since I didn't turn around to look as to recognize or even say I had any interest in the man whatsoever, the security guard said, "This is the waiting area. These people have a right to be here. And since obviously he's not interested in you, and I certainly wasn't, I'm not going to have him arrested sitting here in the waiting area." And George Michaels stalked off, angry as hell. And the security guard knew that by my not turning around and taking a look, that I wasn't any concern to him whatsoever. Brian saw his girlfriend. She told them that her parents, because of the delay, her parents were able to arrive, that she didn't need a ride back to their home, that we were free to go, and we left the Miami International Airport, but we didn't go back down Alligator Alley. I took another route. That if I was being stalked by George Michaels at the International Airport, I certainly wasn't going to go retracing my steps back the other route that I came in, that I took another route home. Because it's certainly, and I have to say this certainly, if somebody was following me from Thanaanasasa down I-75 over Alligator Alley, when I went 100 miles an hour over Alligator Alley, I lost my tail. Even though I did make the International Airport, that the assumption was that George Michaels was there. I was being tailed, and I went back home another way. So when I got evicted out of the Oak Park home of that Jewish woman, I had already heard on the radio that George Michaels was coming to America on a concert tour in 1988. Well, this is definitely time that if I'm going to be thrown out of my face out of her residence, and I'm going to be homeless, this is a time to travel. That being on the road was a little bit better of avoiding assault. And of course, I was fired at everywhere I went. I probably already a member of the 700 Club, and can't count all the times they shot at me. But I knew of a few of them and the witnesses. And after returning from Arizona, running across Martina McBride, that was a signature witness of an event in Wichita that Richard Weaver would deliver the story after she ordered him as the photographer writer of her coming fame as a singer to say, find out who that man was. I gave him the full listed name of the Lord God Almighty, Christ St. Peter, Gregory Allen McCowan. And I just cut George Michael's throat. So that was a signature moment. And then George Michaels, of course, was later having throat surgery, ending his concert tour. Now you know why I don't own a gun. I got a sword in my mouth. And we're going to get around to that shortly in the reading of my letter here, that I was completing a dangerous weapon from Universal Gear. So those were the adventurous days of 1988 and my survival. And when I got back to Michigan, of course, they made a snow emergency and stole my American Concorde from me. That's after I resealed this. I spent $200 to reseal the fuel tank. And then they stole the vehicle. They didn't want me traveling around. And by the association of the home I was living in and another woman who was associated with a tramp from the JFK assassination in Motor City Sign, of which one of the owners of the company had been killed in Canada, a Ted Calls, Kales, Theodore Calls. That Raymond Edward Collins assumed the ownership of Motor City Sign. And he had two daughters married to Chrysler executives. And of course, on February 2nd, or February 17th, 1986, I went into first Charles S. Mott High School, seeing a Gregory Quay and showing him a letter that I was going to deliver to Lee Iacocca, and he was reading it, and he was editing it for grammatical errors. Okay, I think I have only a short time to get down to Highland Park before 5 o'clock when the closing hour to deliver this, so this was 3:30 after hours of the teachers at Charles S. Mott High School. Gave him a half an hour or so to read it. He was annotating it with grammatical errors. Well, that's enough. You could have read most of it if you didn't want to sit there and do the editing. I gave him a whole book of it later to read. But Charles S. Mott High School contacted me and said, "Your book is here in our office for you to retrieve." Never went back. It's like, great. Public records. Put it on the bookshelf. So when I got back from around the country, of which I wasn't supposed to live past that travel, and returned back to Michigan, Lee Iacocca and other individuals understood the association of the Motor City Sign owner having two daughters married to Chrysler executives. That this would be the best place to put me into. And so I moved in December 4th, 1988, my birthday. And he said, before we put the utilities on and the heating system, here's a heater for you. And that heater, when it was operating, turned into a blowtorch. I woke up in the middle of the night with that heater standing a flame 5 foot high in my room. And the only thing I could do was take a blanket and smother it. Now, I didn't get burned. I didn't suffer any injuries from that flame, other than a little bit of smoke inhalation. But that was my introduction to Motor City Sign. That immediately, the first day I was there, they were trying to burn down the entire building. Me inside. So I survived that, and there's numerous stories. Brian Keith Schmittler eventually joined me, delivered my cat free to me there, and of which, the story be told, I got a lot of stories to be told. I took pictures of me and Free the cat in front of my father's house, and on June 2nd, 1987, just like 2 hours before I was dragged out of my father's house, I took another picture of Free the cat with me. And those pictures have been preserved. But the interesting thing is what I was doing was that from that June 2nd, 1987, this is one of the marvels of history. Brian's Jewish girlfriend gave us a whole ounce of marijuana. So here's marijuana coming from somewhere around the world, all the way to Michigan, and it flies from Michigan to Dallas International Airport, all the way down to Miami International Airport. And Brian picks up the ounce of marijuana from his girlfriend. And this ounce of marijuana, we didn't smoke much, a little bit at a time. So here's January 27th, and we still had a half an ounce of marijuana still remaining from that delivery, because we had a life to live. We weren't smoking an ounce of marijuana a day, let's put it that way. Just a little bit, all you needed. But this ounce of marijuana was in my car on April 1st and April 2nd when we were going back to Michigan. And of course, when we were arrested on the highway, while we were in the jail cell, I gave Brian $420 that I had in my pocket and said, "This is yours. I don't need it." So that would be the money that Brian would be allowed for his partnership with me to be released, and he could make a life back in Michigan. He would get the Free the cat that was in my car at the time, and I made a reference to the marijuana that he needed to take out of the car when he left, because it was still there. So if you haven't seen the video of me going head on into a collision with a state trooper, I was 15 feet away from him, directly facing him, and in 15 feet I changed the direction of that car to bounce off of him side by side right in front of another truck that I just passed, and bounce off of his vehicle slide across the road in front of the truck, who was probably slamming the brakes, looking at a head-on collision about to occur. And it certainly did. But I had my stained glass mirror behind me in the seat, and I knew that if I went in head-on into that trooper, that glass would come up as sure as a guillotine. And the only way that glass survived is that when I hit the trooper side by side, the glass went sideways, which would not shatter any of the panes of glass. And of course, keep my cat alive from being cut to pieces. So Brian got the cat out of the car, got the bag of marijuana that was delivered January 27th, 1987, in Miami International Airport, got my $420, got his car out of hock. He was free to go. This is after we were killed and poisoned, and I resurrected him 8 hours later, telling God, well, I got resurrected. The sheriffs were all sitting there saying, what are we going to do with the other guy who's still dead? So I told God, well, it's time to resurrect him. And then they released him the next day. And Brian took the cat, the car, his car, and perused my car and found the marijuana and took that out. When I was finally released April 21st, 1987, after torturing the sheriffs because I discovered I was Christ Peter and was time to use the power of God again here. And this is before cutting the throat of George Michaels. Time to use the power of God and torture them and get the hell out of here, son. So they called up my father. My father came down and picked me up, sitting on a street corner waiting for him. Well, Brian returned the cat, which I could make photographs of from April, May, June 2nd. And delivered me both my bong and the remaining marijuana from that January 87, because that was a lot. And he didn't smoke a lot, and I didn't smoke a lot. You only need a little bit to be comfortable and enjoy it without wasting it needlessly, because you got to put yourself to bed. In that regard, I made some other mirrors and projects through April, May, and June. And then my father had me thrown out of the house for calling him King David. Now, the only reason I wasn't put under marijuana arrest is because I put the bong and the marijuana in the cat food. And I told Brian, you go, once I got dragged off into the hospital and told Brian to rescue my cat, I told him, make sure you take the cat food with you. So Brian got the cat out of my father's house because the cat knew Brian, and Brian could pick it up, and the cat wasn't afraid of Brian. But he grabbed the cat food bag so he could walk out of my father's house with a bong and a bag of marijuana, and everyone would just see it as just a bunch of cat food. So the situation was rescued that I was never in my entire life arrested at any one point for possession of marijuana. And of course, by December 2003, I quit it entirely because I figured that the situation was out of hand. That if I was ever arrested for any charges of marijuana, I would lose all my property. And that wasn't going to happen. So that was the end of that. And then immediately after I quit, the Pinellas County Sheriffs and Police in St. Petersburg had 100 people arrested for marijuana. Oh my God. It's like there was no better timing for going cold turkey. 2003 was the best time to stop. Now, I never let marijuana use any time in my life interfere with my life. I didn't wake up in the morning and smoke marijuana and go to work. I didn't wake up in the morning and drink beer and go to work. After I had fulfilled my sleep, my resuscitation, which I would do every 2 hours, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drink 16 ounces of water, and after 16 ounces of water, I'd have to wake up another 2 hours later, take a piss. I'd drink another 16 ounces of water. And I had to wake up at 2 hours after that to take another piss and drink another 16 ounces of water. So I was flushing my body out during the night, even though I didn't go directly 8 hours straight sleep. Didn't bother me because after drinking 16 ounces of water, I could go right back to sleep, and I knew I was going to get up in another 2 hours because I had to take a piss, and nobody was sticking my hand in a glass of water to make me piss in my bed. So I had my own clock system even while I was sleeping. Then after I got up to relieve myself, drink another 16 ounces, I'd do it again another 2 hours later. So whenever I went into work the next day, even if I had smoked the previous evening or drank any alcoholic beverages, I was clean as a whistle by the next day. And nobody would know the difference. But then again, in the community of those 100 people being arrested at December, January 2003, 2004, there were a lot of undisciplined people. And they didn't have the same security precautions that I had to safeguard myself and my privacy. And so I had to separate myself from that so that I wasn't swept up in their dragnet whether they were dealers, and with 100 people being arrested, they were just people using it that were just swept up. So when I quit, I wasn't taken in the dragnet because they knew I didn't have anything to be able to be accused of. Just call it a close call. And when I got fired, from my night position, December 22nd, 2003, that was just like setting me up that all the workers that I went in to work with were arrested. They didn't get me. Because after I got fired, I disassociated with them. Except one. And from that December 2003, when I quit smoking marijuana, that in January 2004, that's when I wrote the book, Thou Art My Son. So, not that completely sober, but I wrote that book after I quit. There was a lot of other close calls. But, I don't want to disclose how close they came. Can you imagine this? Here is a landlord when I was in 1993. When I was there on 190 Perry Street into July 27th. This is July 27th. So somehow it just resonates again in history. I come back from the Silverdome and find out my entire residence has been thrown out in the street and they boarded up the door so I couldn't get in. They took the cat that I had at that time and put it in somebody else's car with the cat food. Inside, the cat food, of course, was my bong and the marijuana. And the police were there, having thrown me out by the landlord's discretion because I didn't have a signed lease. And I wasn't going to be given any court review to have me evicted. They just preemptorily just said, "You're out of here." They didn't think to look in the cat food bag for the marijuana or the bong. They just thought it was cat food when they were throwing it into the car with the cat. A couple weeks before, I got a knock on the door by the Pontiac police officers, came into my room. Now, one of the things about security is that whenever I took a bong hit of marijuana and I'm sitting there stoned in front of their face when they come up to the door, as I exhale into the freezer or the refrigerator so that there's no smoke in the air of any marijuana whatsoever. And I exhale in, close the door, all the moisture of the breath goes into frost, smell eliminated. Put the bong and the marijuana into a cat food bag inside the refrigerator. So, you know, these pet food commercials with the cat food in the refrigerator. You serve your dog food in a from a refrigerator, throw them right out the door. Well, police came out right up to me and questioned me, walked around the room, and really it was a serious situation for them because right below my feet was a cellar loaded with 50 caliber ammunition and 50 caliber guns, like a secret cache of weapons. And they were seriously feeling threatened that if I discovered that and pulled it out, I could become a dangerous individual. Well, I may have discovered it, but I wasn't going to do anything with it. So that's why they had me thrown out. Because I was sitting on some dangerous weaponry. They didn't know that I had been developing dangerous weaponry, and they didn't know how dangerous my weapons are. But somebody knew where the weapons were and where the ammunition was. And they're saying, well, we're going to get you out of here real quick. And they did. Let me go back to my reading here. As far as I'm concerned, the throne of God in heaven wants a United States government dead. Political murderers, as have had their last election, 2024, they will all be dead by November 2026. Trump literally said to Zelensky, August 18th, when understanding Ukrainian election preempted by war, well, that's an idea. Donald Trump wants to create a war to end the elections in the United States. And America always had elections, even during war. But he thinks he can supersede that. Create Venezuelan war provokes a negative response to war in states. Trump then has his political turmoil among troop occupying and civil war unrest to deny elections. Jew communists supply violence for Trump invading the United Nations Army to kidnap and kill. And then another scenario is to be told later. Of course, that's the Article 5 of the state citizen saying, we're going to end the Trump kidnapping and the federal communist kidnapping of the United States to be defended by the Lord God Almighty. That's the book of life. We are not going to stand there and be a nation kidnapped by the Jewish communists invading to claim that they have jurisdiction to create the American people as their Egyptian slaves, as prisoners of war. Now, my unemployment benefits paid transit of Michigan to Florida. Now, I was at M&N Plastics and got fired, and the unemployment benefits were paid to me, and by the time I left Michigan, the unemployment benefits would continue being paid to me at my post office box in Michigan, and my father would pick up those post office checks from my post office box of my unemployment and then later remail them down to Florida for me to cash in those checks to support my life in Florida. So I went from Michigan to Florida with unemployment checks to support myself while I was looking for work. And of course, as the story goes, I had to sell a VCR for $35 at a pawn shop. Went down to the MGM Grand, went on the roulette wheel and turned $35 into $115. And then I had enough gas to get down to Florida. Of course, the previous time I took a unemployment check in there, and there's two Detroit Tiger baseball players next to me at the blackjack table. I won $3,000. They won $6,000. We were one hell of a table, let me tell you that. They were playing next to the unknown owner of the Detroit Tigers. I was playing $25 chips, and they were playing $50 chips. So they doubled the winnings that I had won. But this is after a Tiger game. I threw it all back away. Before I left the MGM Grand, I went to a $100 table, threw it all back, and I walked out of there with nothing because I didn't want to be stalked with a lot of money walking out. Once they knew I was clean, I could get out of the MGM Grand. But I walked in there on the evening of June 12th with just $35, walked out of there $113 without cleaning the house of a lot of money so I could just get out of the state and enough gas to get down to Florida. Later, when I returned back to Michigan to see my father in 2005, in June, I had $100 to get back to Florida, but I went down to the MGM Grand, went to the blackjack tables, won $1,400, and then walked out and made my way to Florida. So there's a way to play blackjack. Accept your losses when you know they're going to occur. But when you have your chance to win a hand, you double down and do everything else you can. One guy watched me double deuces and double fours and say, what the hell is this guy all doing? And then the dealer, so here I got 4, 6, 8 hands in front of me of deuces and fours. And the dealer goes over 21. I was taking out of the deck all the small cards that would have burned everybody. Just by my doubling down on the deuces and the fours and cleaning the deck of all the cards I could get out of the small cards, so that by the time the dealer got around to having his card played, he was going over 21. And everybody at the table understood what I did. It's like I was committing suicide, when actually I saved the table. Mostly people, when you get a double jack or a double 10 or a double queen, that's when you split cards, or even double aces. That was splitting twos and fours. Two twos would come up and I'd split them, and two fours come up, I'd split them, and then I kept splitting the twos and the fours and cleaning out that small card number, because those numbers would have been under 21 and busted everybody on the table. So anyways, I went from Michigan to Florida with unemployment checks, and then in my last time I got 4 unemployment payments in Florida. The first time I didn't, but then I understood how to argue for the unemployment after the first failure. And I got 4 unemployment payments. And in 2008, when I got fired for unemployment, I argued it, and I didn't get my unemployment check until 2009, after I was evicted out of my residence and after I was living on the street. It saved all my most important property at that time, though. And I had a cab driver that could have saved my residence there. But he got involved with a woman in one of his night excursions, and she robbed him of $700. He couldn't pay for the cab, couldn't pay for my rent. And that was the end of that. That would eventually get me evicted because he couldn't maintain discipline and keep out of the relationship of those inside of his delivery of his cab. And he got stung. The woman got her $700 and she flew back to Massachusetts. And he lost his life out of his cab and had me thrown in the street as a consequence. But I argued my unemployment benefits, and when that happened, I was out of the state of Florida. And that's where I went from Florida to Texas with an unemployment check following me. I established a Wells Fargo account with direct deposit so that when I went into another state, the direct deposit would go to Wells Fargo, and I could go to any Wells Fargo bank anywhere and withdraw the funds. And so when I went to Texas, not only would I do the Jack Reacher, Tom Cruise disappear, I wouldn't register to vote whatsoever, because that was public information. I'd have to still register with the Motor Department of Vehicles for a state identification, but that was being held and reserved as secret. And without my registering to vote in Texas, no one knew where I was. But I was still getting paid. I direct deposited into Wells Fargo from the unemployment insurance and later Social Security disability insurance that I could therefore withdraw the funds and sustain my life in Texas and survive during the, as it would be now, next 16 years, 2009, next 16 years. Without anybody knowing where I am. Because I refuse to vote. I refuse to be recognized or recognize a government that's trying to kill me. If they want to recognize me now, they have their chance. If I give you my state ID, 28632893 in Texas, it's reserved in privacy of information where I'm actually living. And I still have my Florida voter's registration card as the last state by constitutional authority. The citizens of the several states have the rights of all the other states. And when I requested to vote, they said, well, if you're not living in Florida, you can't vote. And that's wrong. I can still be a registered voter in one state and live in another state, and I still have the right to vote. But this is the new generation of lawless anarchy that, oh no, we have the right and prerogative to say that if you're not here personally, you can't vote. That's a lie. Anyways, my friend took a picture of me January 24, 2009, and then also the picture of the toenail of the eagle and the scroll. So the eagle will be landing in Houston April 23rd, 2009 as a president. Jesus wanted me to be president, and I announced myself. They refused, but Jesus still gave me an eagle as a seal vision, a seventh seal vision, that indeed he recognized me to be a president. Even if the rest of the whole world dies, I'd be the last man alive upon the earth. Matthew chapter 24, verse 22. If not for the elect's sake, no flesh should be saved alive. So I'd be the only one saved alive because no one gives a damn about the elect. Now, the eagle landing in Houston, you know, the moon landing, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong, the eagle has landed. On April 23rd, 2009, the eagle landed in Houston, Texas. I'm certain all you historians, because it's all in the pictures, it's all in the photographs taken in Florida of the eagle on my toenail, January 24th, 2009, before I cut that toenail off in Texas. That eagle was carrying me to Houston, to where it could be announced later the eagle has landed. Anyways, I've gotten to my 2-hour limit here. 2:10 p.m., October 6th, 2025, in my address to we the people. There's a lot of stories in my life that have been untold, not being written. And I still feed the cats in the alley. My friend was mocking me yesterday. You failed to feed the cats. Well, I did get it out there eventually. I'm very busy making these videos, so it's interrupting the cat's feeding schedule, but they're still getting their food delivered. Especially since one of the cats had its previous owner die of leukemia. And so I'm assuming the continuance of that cat's freedom to live. Now I have another cat that was called Golden Fur, and it's been reborn. And Golden Fur is not gold anymore, but he's got golden eyes. He's got 4 white paws, like shoes. It's just amazing. But he's still got the white vest on the front of his chest. So I don't call him Golden Fur, I call him No-No. Now the other cat is a multicolored cat, just like you would think the coat of Jacob was. Multicolored coat, gold and stripes and silver and white, black, just amazing. It's just an amalgamation of all cat colors in one cat. They call it Tina. Anyways, very good. I'll have to process this film. It'll take some time. And then I'll start up another video shortly. And I haven't completed my reading, but at least I got through just the short scenario. The eagle has landed in Houston, Texas. And I'll be back for We the People and continuing these stories later.